So this video went way too long. It's about 15 minutes. I actually had another section planned, and then I just figured we're just going to stop here. I'll create another video, which we'll talk about at the end of this. So we're going to go out in the field here in a sec, but I just have to kind of warn you guys, I look to my left quite a bit, and I think you guys have to understand, I'm not filming in really progressive places like California, Nevada, Iowa, where if you have some old dude out in the middle of the field really early in the morning talking to himself, it's probably standard run of the mill there, but here it's a little weird and it's going to stop traffic. And that's what you'll notice. I'm looking to my left quite a bit. I'm stopping traffic. People are wondering what the heck I'm doing here. So take that with a grain of salt there. That's what happened. We'll come back in and wrap things up here and look forward to the next video.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. So, got the P950 Nikon. You guys know P1000, A1000. This video is going to be about usage case or using any kind of bridge camera, point and shoot, to get away from that cell phone look, to try to give you more of a mirrorless DSLR look, give you a little bit more polished photos. I'm going to go over some of the ways you use the camera and set some things up as far as focus and all that. But if you haven't seen the first part of this series, there's a series 1. I think I'll put a link here or link down below. Do yourself a favor, 10 or 15 minutes. It will save you hours, believe it or not. And yeah, it will get you rocking and rolling. This video will make a lot more sense. Not that you won't get something out of it, but it just brings everything full circle. And so yeah, let's get going here. So let's talk focus tracking. Now, every camera system or every review out there pretty much says the same thing about these point and shoots, is their continuous focus, their tracking is not that great. And I would agree in comparison. So, but the thing is, if you look at the Sony systems and the Nikon systems, just from experience, I'll show you a few photos here. I used off-brand glass, like Sigma glass. And it's very tough to get a subject tracking right with you, eye sharp, focus everything by using, let's say, a Sony and a Sigma mount or a Nikon and a Sigma mount. Generally, they reserve that their really unique tracking systems and very super fast focus has to be matched with really good glass and the high-end stuff. So that's the thing. A lot of people will get, let's say, a Sony, a Nikon D500, and they end up, they're still disappointed because there's a lot of different settings you got to go into. It takes hours, and also you got to get the really expensive glass. So here's an example where I've taken advantage of kind of the Panasonic G9, and here's a photo here where the eyes are really sharp and caught in focus. Everything's pixel sharp. And that was done by a simple mechanism of actually switching things over to manual focus and just waiting for the animal to come into focus for what you're trying to do. So I set up, had the dog run straight at me, everything was manual focus, and then I just put it on super high burst speed to capture the moment. So I burst probably 10, 15, 20 photos within that second, and I captured 2 or 3 that were really sharp. And there was I took that, basically the autofocus out of the equation, and I would suggest you do that too. It's really easy to do, and it works, and it's something that's simple. It's across the board. We talked about in the previous video pros and cons, disadvantages, using some of the weaknesses for the strengths. One of the things that people do not think about is the fact that these cameras have a ton of depth of field, and they see it as a disadvantage, and in a lot of ways it can be. But I noticed when I switched to full frame, like the Sony A7R3, R4, that I was missing focus on a lot of birds' eyes. And the reason is because the depth of field is so tight, like you don't get much room for error. And if you get eye focus on that bird and he moves his head just a little, it's blurry. Where I noticed, going back to point and shoots, if I just hit him in the chest, the neck, it generally would work out well. So 600, 800 millimeters, 2000 millimeters, I can still nail focus and kind of be a little bit sloppy. And this is where it comes all back around to the focus system on this. It's not as good as the other systems, but you don't necessarily have to be as sharp and as crisp and pinpoint because your depth of field is a little bit better. that taken into consideration, I'll give you an example here. So here's a bird photo, 3,000 millimeters, pointed right at the chest, but you'll notice the eyes are like pen sharp, and that's the advantage. I know some of the other photos I've hit. I'll show you an example of kind of a missed focus. This is on micro four thirds, 600, 800 mil. The bird's eyes, the cardinal's eyes are in focus, but if you look at the back of the bird, it's totally out of focus. It's almost too tight a depth of field. Like I would like to or stop down a little bit to get the bird's tail feathers in a little bit more, or completely. So that's just an advantage. Think about it, use it. A lot of people don't really consider that. But yes, that allows us a little bit more sloppy play, a little bit more forgivingness on these cameras. Use it. You can actually use it as far as focusing, let's say, on what I call a posing stick, where you're already focused, and if you switch off, you go from manual or autofocus to manual focus, wait for a bird to kind of come in, and then just pull the trigger. Just lay down on the trigger, and hopefully the bird lands and moves around a little bit. You'll get some in focus, and you can always recompose, hit the bird, the body, and you should be pretty close to being all in focus there. So it's a good tip. I hope that works out for you. All right, next small tip, continuous shooting. I know in the first video we talked about this, but let's break it down a little bit more in detail. I have a tendency, in the Nikons, there's 3 shooting speeds: slow, medium, and fast. Continuous shooting. And I have a tendency to match those with the shooting of the animal. So if it's a fast animal, like a bird coming down, I know I'm only going to have limited time, I'll shoot in the fastest possible speeds, the fast, which is like 7 frames a second for this camera. Yours will have something somewhat similar. And I only do that because I know, because this has a limit, a really kind of lousy limit of 21 JPEGs, and then the camera freezes up. It literally, you can't do anything for like 20 seconds. I wish Nikon would fix something like this, or would have came out with a little bit better version of their buffer, but it's what I have to live with. So, fast birds coming down an area, I put on fast focus speed. On my other videos, if you've seen, most of the time I'm on medium to low, because if I'm spending more time with the animal, I generally will just sit there and photograph at a click rate. You'll kind of hear some of the photos here on the last video, the rabbit video, because I know I'm going to have a minute or two. And if it's a larger animal, it's slow, I'll put it on low. So it's dependent on how fast the animal's moving, because the worst thing I want to have happen is the camera lock up. Because if I see something coming up that might be interesting, I have some, JPEGs in the buffer that I can switch over to fast mode, or I can just capture that moment. But again, I go back to, if the camera locks up, and they all do this, all the point and shoots kind of at some point will get a buffer filled, overflow, and the camera just kind of slows up, locks up. You don't want to be in that position if something kind of unique happens and you want to capture that moment. So match the shooting speed with how fast the action's happening, and think ahead, and it works out pretty well. All right, let's talk image stabilization. Yeah, these cameras are great with image stabilizing. You can shoot them down to 1/80th of a second or something, even lower at 3,000, 2,000 millimeters. But there is some drawbacks or things that you have to be cognizant. They're not totally 100%. You'll see some guys or some videos, even reviews, saying that the lens isn't that sharp. Well, they're either shooting it too far, where you get atmospheric conditions like 5 miles or something, they get heat waves, or they're really taking over. They don't really realize you're shooting 2,000 millimeters and you're gonna need some awesome stability. So most of my usage, I have some kind of stabilizer. I'll have a tripod for the most part. And the nice thing about that is it doesn't take a really expensive tripod. You can get a cheap tripod because these cameras are so light. You don't need the big stuff, right? So it works well, get a nice tripod head. But let's talk some other ways. There's some things there. You can use sandbags, your car door if your car's stopped and it's not running, tables, whatever. A lot of times you'll see me, I'm laying on the ground and I just use my camera bag, or just some dirt. You kind of do that. So if you're gonna hand hold this, there's a few techniques you can use. and it's pretty universal. It's a 3-point contact system. A lot of times I'll take a camera strap, kind of wrap my hand in here and get it locked in really tight. And then of course that's 1 point, and then you got the second point is on your head, and the third point's that second hand there. And hopefully you can lock it in, and you can just make yourself all one piece, all one unit. You're absorbing any kind of shake, any kind of thing there. I know it goes without saying, but believe it or not, there's a lot of people that are blaming some of the equipment and the lenses of not being that sharp. It's probably the shake. It happens to all of us. Okay. Another tip, focal length to aperture settings. So this is not a fixed aperture lens. This is something, it's 24 to 2000 millimeter. I think at 3.5 or 3.2 to f, I think 8 or something like that. f5 6.5, I think at 2000 millimeters. But how I'll use this is I'll always think about in the middle of the road. So if I'm, let's say, at 1000 millimeters, and if I kick it past 1000 millimeters, let's say 1025, and it jumps up, or the f-stop jumps from 5.6 to 6.5, I'll just go down 25 millimeters to where it says, let's say 5.6, and move a little bit closer. I'll actually adjust where my hides are at, or the distance. I'll have 2 or 3 different spots, and I'll know that, and I'll correlate that to my lens focal length and aperture settings. So you always want to shoot at your widest aperture settings in these cameras, because generally I don't notice that big a difference in sharpness, but the benefit obviously is you get a little bit faster shutter speed, or you can get a little bit lower ISO if you do that, if you know where you're shooting. So if it's just a little bit, it's in the inroads, it's in the middle ground that you really got to think about this, because wide angle, it doesn't really matter that much. If you're going 2000 millimeters at the far end, you're stuck at, let's say, f-stop 6.5, f8, you have no choice. But if you're in the middle ground, let's say 1000 millimeters, or if going from 700 to 750, you get an extra stop of light by with your aperture, then just do that. Shoot at 700 instead of 750. So you'll know, you'll be able to eke out just that little amount of performance to get your ISO or your shutter speed. And also it comes down to the bokeh and getting close to your subject, your compression of that. So the closer you can get, less atmospheric conditions, you're going to get a better background, you're going to get a better subject pop, and also you're opening up your aperture on your camera to get a little bit better subject pop as well. So it really does help. Here's an example here of a small bird captured probably 15 years ago on a Sony point and shoot. And you'll notice the subject totally pops. The bird's feathers are even out of focus. So I was so close to the animal, this little guy, that all I have is his face in focus, and the rest of the bird pretty much just drifts away. A lot of people would think that's a DSLR or a full frame. It's a simple point and shoot. You get close to the bird, you can kind of pull off some of these shots. I guess in addition to knowing your lens, knowing what the f-stop, the aperture is at the focal distance, one of the things that's not really thought about is your minimum focus distance. Now, a lot of these cameras have on macro mode. Make sure if you're getting super close, know your minimum focus for the lens and the length that you're shooting at, the focal length, because it does change. So if you're shooting at, let's say 500, 700, and you can only get 10 feet close, if you bump it down to maybe 500 millimeters, 400 millimeters, you might be able to get a lot closer. So the focus distance, minimum focus distance, is another thing you need to take a look at. A lot of times you can go on macro mode, which does help if you're really close, but it is an issue because a lot of people might shoot at 2000 millimeters and be really close to something, or fairly close to something, and they would be better off shooting at, let's say, 1000 millimeters and just using their foot zoom to get a little bit closer.
So, 6 tips. I hope this helps. If you combine this with the first video, your photography, your images are definitely going to look more polished, a lot better. You don't have the training wheels of, let's say, the DSLR, the mirrorless, the full frame. You don't have those advantages, but you have some other advantages. If you do the things in this video, obviously you're going to see improvement. And then if you go to the bigger equipment, you're going to improve, because you don't really have to worry about a lot of these things, but you'll be cognizant of the things you can get away with. So the next video I want to try to do is I want to take us into a blind, set up the composition, things to avoid, things to look for, and everything, and walk you through kind of a step-by-step of some bird photography, now that you understand the settings in that. So if you guys are looking forward to that, thumbs up, thumbs down, however you want to do that. Hit that like, subscribe button, ask questions, and hopefully I will see you next week.